Greetings. My name's Guy Dauncey, and this is the show Change the World, where I like to invite guests on my show who are exploring the same big questions and the same big, bold solutions to the world crises that frankly preoccupy most of my time. Because as most of you know, our world has got some pretty shaky things going on, and we need to balance that shakiness of uncertainty with some big visionary ideas and some big understanding of what the crises are. So today, I'm privileged to have a climate scientist who's been a 50-year professional, Geoff Strong, who's been working in the field for more than 50 years, working with Environment Canada, Alberta Research Council, several universities. You're a fellow and a former national president of the Canada Meteorological and Oceanographic Society. Now you're retired, but still 100% engaged, right?
Very much so.
What's it been like working for 50 years in this field? Because 50 years ago, no one talked about climate crisis, right? How have you seen it appear on your radar?
In the 1980s, it first came up with people like Jim Hansen.
Yes.
And when I retired in 98, I realized the seriousness of it myself. Up till then, I'd been concentrating on, well, severe thunderstorms, tropical storms, that sort of thing. That was my area of expertise.
So you're probably amused by the little photo that went around the internet a couple of days about this guy in Alberta mowing his lawn, and a big tornado coming up behind him. Oh, just another tornado, right?
Yeah. It was funny.
Yeah.
But he knew what was going on, he was obviously.
Yes, but the metaphor would be similar, like if that tornado was set at that tornado might have been like 10 minutes away. The climate crisis is anywhere from an hour away if you've got a forest fire coming down on you to 50 years away if it's a sea level rise thing. But we're similarly just getting on with life. And there was a survey done of climate scientists in the year 2011, and they asked what words did they use to describe their future outlook, and catastrophic was the word chosen by 41% of the scientists.
Yeah, not surprised, yeah.
Speak to your sense of the seriousness of the climate crisis.
Well, one of the problems, I think, is that climate science has almost done us a disservice by talking about, global temperature rise. Yeah. That's not really the important thing. The important thing is the amount of heat we're pouring into the atmosphere and the oceans and the land, right? At least that's my take on it, and what that extra energy is doing to weather systems, desertification in the subtropics, melting the great ice sheets. All of these things are because of the heat, the increase in heat.
It was certainly from a presentation I saw you do that I paid more attention to what was happening in Syria, where most people think, oh, they're just all fighting, but you've got another take on it.
Well, all of the great deserts of the world are controlled in the subtropics, appear in the subtropics overland, including the Sahara and the Arabian Desert. And with global warming, these deserts are expanding. So if you look back about the year 2000, Syria had a very vibrant economy, along with oil. It had a very vibrant agricultural economy. They were exporting food all over the Middle East, even into Europe. And around about 2005 or 2006, they hit a severe drought. And as far as I can tell, that drought has gone on right up until today. So by about 2009 or so, the rural community in Syria, about 1.5 million of them, were moving into the cities. They were moving in as unemployed.
So they just had to abandon their farms?
They had to abandon a lot of their farms, right?
So that's like everyone in rural Alberta becoming
into Calgary and Edmonton. Exactly, yeah. So you take 1.5 million people and spread them around two main cities, Aleppo and Damascus, of 2 million each, and you got a lot of overcrowding, civil and economic upset. And eventually to the point where Bashar al-Assad, clamped down, and whenever, if there was a food riot or anything, they just opened fire on them, right? So, but about 300,000 Syrians were murdered in the streets, effectively.
So the media has fed us a picture about the civil war that starts with Assad firing on the crowds, basically, and then leads people getting angry,
right?
and then as you know, then the terrorists moved in, and it all goes crazy with about 6 different groups. But the story before that, why it gets ignored, of why did that happen? And that makes alarm bells ring in my mind, because if it happens in Syria, what other parts of the world?
All across the Sahel region of Africa.
Which countries are we talking about?
Well, from Mauritania, Senegal in the west. Since the 70s, they've had severe drought there. Wow. And then you get into the middle of the Sahel around Chad, Niger. Yeah. Northern Nigeria is in extreme drought now. And then you go into Ethiopia. And in the last decade, it's jumped and spread down into East Africa, all the way to the equator, because Kenya is in severe drought.
I remember being at school learning geography, and you learnt about Lake Chad, right in the middle of Africa. This is a big lake, and it was full of water. And now
it's all gone, pretty much.
Pretty much all gone?
It is a shallow lake. And it isn't all caused by global warming, because there are, you know, so many 30-odd million people depending on that river basin for water, and so there was a lot of irresponsible irrigation and that sort of thing. But still, global warming took a lot of. You look at Lake Chad now and Google Earth or some lake. If you zoom in on it, you'll see there are, where there used to be lake, there are sand dunes, right? So.
Well, I gather that the U.S. military, in its strategic assessment of the future risks, has looked at the climate crisis and the refugees coming out of the climate crisis and got alarm bells ringing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the economic world has recognizing this as well. And of course, Africa is not the only place. You can go to southern Africa. The Kalahari is doing much the same thing. The Australian desert, we've heard of. Well, they've alternated between severe drought and flooding storms, right?
And fire.
And fire, yeah. As we have in Alberta and Saskatchewan, right?
Now, is the American subcontinent impacted by the same subtropical?
Yeah, the Mexican, New Mexico, Arizona desert is intensifying, and estimates are that within a couple of decades, the southwest of U.S. will be unlivable, right? Due to high temperatures and droughts.
And then on top of that, I've seen estimates that when you look at California, where a lot of the food has been growing, and I think 50% of all the produce in America, North America, comes from the Great Central Valley.
Pretty much,
and that some of the water supplies, the snow melt on the snow on the Sierra Nevada melting gradually, and if the snow disappears, your water disappears, and they're back into that drought situation, and then you're going to have.
And again, there's overuse of water for irrigation there too, but of course it's increased in recent years.
So let's switch from the Sahel region, and I promise viewers we're going to get onto the positive solutions to the climate crisis, so stick with us, but I want to deal with one more aspect here, the Arctic. I know you've had some work going on about what's happening in the Arctic.
Well, of course, the Arctic is where temperatures have risen the most, at least twice what we're experiencing in the mid-latitudes. 2 to 4 times.
Last winter up to 30 degrees Celsius warmer, I believe.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. They had spring in the Arctic region when we were suffering here with snow and cold.
And I read somewhere that Alaska had a whole winter without a single day below freezing, or certain areas of Alaska.
Something like that, yeah.
Anyway, so fill me in on your take on what's happening in the Arctic.
Well, there are many impacts there, of course, from melting sea ice, which is causing the albedo of the Arctic region to lower, which is a positive feedback to global warming.
That's too technical.
Sorry.
Albedo is the reflectivity of the sun's light.
Yeah.
So sun on white shines back, sun on black, is absorbed. So if the ice melts,
then it's more absorbed.
So the ocean is darker.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, of course, the melting ice sheets of Greenland and smaller ice sheets in the Arctic that are melting is contributing to sea level rise. One of the more insidious things is the melting permafrost, because underneath the permafrost in the Arctic all around, and Alaska, Canada, Siberia, there are huge stores of peat moss bogs. And as that's exposed, stuff that's been there for tens of thousands, if not hundreds or even millions of years, is starting to decompose, and you get methane release.
What is peat moss?
Just decomposed vegetative matter, and I suppose animals, but
So
mostly.
it's full of carbon
Yeah,
then
exactly.
from living systems.
Yes.
And how does that turn into methane? And what is methane as well?
Well, methane is another, is the second most potent greenhouse gas after carbon dioxide.
Right.
So
So as well as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere accumulating, we've got to worry about methane
we have
accumulating.
methane accumulating, and
Yeah,
nitrous oxide is
so
another
some
one.
of the methane is trapped under the permafrost?
Well, it's trapped in this peat moss,
In the
and
peat
as
moss.
it decomposes, just like in a swamp or
Yes.
in a wetland, you get that smell. That's a lot of that is methane, right?
Right.
As decomposing vegetative matter. So that's happening on a huge scale in the Arctic region.
Yeah.
The problem there is we don't know what stores of peat moss and what stores of methane are there.
Right.
Thanks to governments in the 2000s cutting back northern research.
So the Harper regime.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's
So as
one
well
of
as being a climate scientist, you are a novelist, right?
them. Well,
And your
Tried
book,
my hand at it.
Convenient Mistruths. So Al Gore's film was called The Inconvenient
Inconvenient
Truth.
Truth, and
This
I-
is this is the Convenient Mistruth, which I've been digging into. It covers a lot of this work up in the Arctic.
yeah.
So what's happening in the novel about methane in the Arctic?
Well, I do play up the methane question a bit. It's
Yeah.
a novel after all. right?
Yes.
And
A novel of intrigue, danger, and global warming.
Yeah, and
Yes.
I mean, what I said is that we don't know what stores of methane there. That applies to the permafrost melt, but also to these offshore methane hydrates
Yeah.
that are trapped on the continental shelf all
So I'm
around the
going to stop
Arctic
you
Ocean.
again. What is a methane hydrate?
Well, it's basically methane that's frozen in with water, and they exist as modules and that on the continental
So they look
shelf.
like globs of ice, but actually they're packed full of
Basically,
methane
yeah,
gas.
yeah. And if the Arctic Ocean should warm up enough that
They melt.
that it starts to melt, there's a potential for huge additional stores of methane release there, and that's the part that I
Right.
used in the novel. The rest of the novel, the science in it is pretty accurate.
Yeah.
So
And there are conflicts in this when you've got the oil industry or
Right.
someone trying to suppress the information. Why?
And climate denialists.
Yes.
I picked on the denialists. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's two things. The oil industry, I can understand what motivates them. They want to make money by making from the oil. What's the oil industry connection to the Arctic?
Well, there's lots of drilling in all around the Arctic by not just Canada and the U.S., but by the Russians, by
Right.
Scandinavian countries, and so on.
Because I remember under Obama, he actually put a ban on drilling in the Arctic.
Temporarily, yes. But now
Temporarily.
that's off.
And Trump is lifting it.
Yeah.
So if you're drilling into the ocean floor, you might hit oil and you might hit a methane clathrate, a big high
well,
methane.
there's methane released in anytime you drill for oil, right? There's
Right.
a release of methane. They think in the Arctic that it might be a little more concentrated than it is, say, in Alberta or Texas, these areas.
And then on top of that, you've got the issue that if you have an oil spill in the Arctic,
Yeah,
when it freezes over in the winter,
Yeah.
so say you have an oil spill in October and the weather gets cold within a day and you can't ever stop the spill. Say it's a Gulf of Florida
Yeah.
BP type
Yeah.
spill.
Yeah.
it's just like
It's
mind-blowingly disastrous.
It's catastrophic.
Yeah.
Really,
So the climate denialists, you've had to work with some of them, presumably, in 50 years of life as a climate scientist. What is motivating people to so deny the science of climate change?
Money. We know that Mobil Exxon were providing millions of dollars a year into these think tanks and
Yeah.
other organizations. It was hidden from.
But
from
why are so many ordinary people who are not in the oil industry picking up on climate denial?
Because they're getting money out of.
No, I don't believe that. I've met ordinary people whose private beliefs reject the science of climate change. No one's paying them. They just don't accept the science.
Well, that's out of ignorance. But some of these people, the key denialists,
Yeah.
know what they're doing, and their whole motivation is simply to introduce uncertainty into the global warming question.
And
they've done it very, very successfully in the last 15 years.
And they are being paid indirectly through.
They're getting money through these think tanks and that.
Yeah.
Even University of Calgary for a while, the Alberta government about 10 years ago admitted that there was money channeled through U of C from Mobil Exxon for climate denialists.
And
Calgary is a hotbed for that.
What have you found is the best way to disarm? If someone is watching this, and this is all nonsense, I read all these reports that said none of this is true. What's the best way you found to
Well, I don't know if it's the best way, but what I've tried to do is simply public education. And I've tried any avenue I can, giving talks in schools, churches when you're invited. I even wrote a novel on it.
You wrote a novel, yes.
In fact, I even developed a Bible study in the Anglican Church, which has a lot of climate change in it.
Wow.
And I tried everything I can to just provide public education on.
How do you, I mean, this is who knows where we're going, but the link between the Bible and the climate change?
I don't know if we want to go there, but there is a lot of science actually in the Bible. Yeah. If you ask a theologian, on the one hand, they will tell you no, it's not really science.
God made the world.
If you ask a scientist, he'll say there's no such thing. But I can show you lots of science in the Bible. That's quite surprising.
And the link, how do you, when you're giving a sermon, how
well,
do you tie
the idea is to show that there's no conflict between scripture and science. That was the motivation. And from there I go into climate change.
Do you know, one of the things that I find inspiring about the Muslim faith is that the Prophet said very clearly, go out and get knowledge. Go out and learn and study, because the universe is made by God and it's full of mystery. Let's find out about it. And any religion that says, no, this is the only truth in this book here, don't read anything else, like, no, I don't think so.
Well, of course, they're using the same basis, the Bible. The first 5 chapters of the Bible are used by both Muslim, Jewish, and the Christian faiths.
So let's turn this around then. And I give talks in high schools sometimes, and I'll get the whole 400 kids on the floor of the gym, anywhere from grade 8s up to grade 12s. And I'll say, when you think about the future of our world, what do you feel, worry or hope? Out of 400 kids, I get between 5 and 10 hands saying hopeful, 390 worried. Because they're learning about the climate crisis, but they're not getting any reason for hope or knowing what the solutions are.
And not feeling like they have any control in it, because they don't have the voting power. And
they don't have the voting power. There's no votes for 16-year-olds. They feel like, all of us to some extent feel like deer caught in the headlights with this major crisis. And what is the pathway? We're good, as humans, we're good at solving problems. How are we going to deal with this one?
I tell people there's only one real solution to global warming, and that's we have to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, right? You can talk about geoengineering and all of these things, but nothing is proven there that it's going to make a major difference.
I mean, I have the same approach, that 70% of the cause of the crisis is coming from simply burning ancient carbon, locked up in fossil fuels. We release the carbon. We know that it mixes with oxygen.
We know the relation.
And we know that carbon dioxide traps heat. So like it's step 1, 2, 3. This is like, there's no room for denial in there. It's a law of physics that carbon dioxide traps heat.
But the denialists will tell you that there are other reasons for it, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, for instance, Trump is now saying, President Trump is saying that, there's always been climate change. Yeah. We know there's always been climate change. But this particular episode is really caused by our human activities.
And very rapid by comparison.
Right. Yeah. So I'm in the same game as you. Like, if we are going to move on from fossil fuels to 100% renewable energy, do you see hopeful signs around that?
Yes, I do. I don't know if it's fast enough, but you know that there's been more money and research into alternative energy in the last 5 years than there is in the fossil fuel industry. So you see changes.
Way more jobs in renewables than in fossil fuels.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a hopeful sign, but whether or not we can tackle it in time is another question.
Yeah.
Because one of the problems, of course, as you know, is carbon dioxide has a long residency time in the atmosphere, measured in decades or even a century or more.
I believe that it's at least a 100-year residency in the atmosphere. Yeah. But I also understand that it has a 40-year delay in manifesting heat on the Earth's surface.
Yeah, that's true.
So the additional warming we're seeing in the Arctic here today is the result of fossil fuels burnt in the 1970s.
Yes, that's true.
And whenever we drive a car today, or turn on the gas, or do an LNG plant, the emissions will be felt by our children and grandchildren in 40 years' time.
Yeah, in the 1970s, when atmospheric concentrations were well below 350 parts per million, and now we're up over 410, so it's pretty significant.
It's certainly, it's possible to get alarmed.
Yeah.
But then I look at things like in Holland. Now, Holland, a third of the country is already below sea level. They've got dikes holding the sea out, right? And if you look at the future projections, so we know that we're heading for a temperature increase of 3 to 4 degrees by the end of this century with the Paris Climate Agreement.
Likely.
Yes. And the last time the world was 3 degrees warmer, the sea level was 25 meters higher.
Something like that. Yeah.
And if you look at a map of Holland with 25 meters, virtually the entire country is gone. So now when the Dutch, they announced a few months ago, maybe it was last year, that by 2025, they want to say, you will not be able to buy a car that's not electric. They will only sell electric cars. I think, wow, maybe they're looking at their future saying, oh, and a third of all Dutch journeys are done by bicycle.
And we're headed that way ourselves, really, with electric cars, I think. So.
Well, the same sea level rise for Vancouver wipes out all of Richmond, Delta, Surrey, Tsawwassen, the airport, the I-5 to Seattle, the marine shipping infrastructure. Yeah. The economy is like dead in the water. And you can't build a seawall against a 25-meter, and this wouldn't be for several hundred years.
Yeah, but if it happened even more rapidly, civilization would be in real trouble because everything starts breaking down.
Yeah,
right?
so one of the metaphors I like when I hear people say this, like in the 1890s, the big environmental crisis. Do you know what the big environmental crisis was in the 1890s in the cities of Europe?
Tell me.
Horse manure.
Oh.
Horse manure piling up on the streets, right? The smell, the stink, the disease. And yet by 1920, all the horses were gone. We were all driving cars. There'd been a transition, which was very rapid. And I think the same transition to cycling, electric vehicles, electric buses, car sharing, ride sharing, could happen in 10 years.
Yes. 10 is optimistic, I think, but yeah, you may be right.
If in Norway, 50% of all new vehicles are now electric today. Because in Norway, as well as giving you a financial incentive, you get free rides on the ferries, free parking, free charging, free use of the SOV lanes, HOV lanes rather, and free whatever. Huge incentives, right?
If we went all electric, that would cover 25 or 30% of the emissions, I guess. So.
Well, we know we can do it for cars. We know we can do it for light trucks. Elon Musk at Tesla is bringing out the first electric pickup truck. There are electric 18-wheelers with a range of about 100 kilometers. So far, there's nothing for long-distance transport or long-distance shipping or flying. Well, but flying is only 2% of the...
They're testing aircraft on solar. I'm not getting on it.
Well, it takes one... They fly around the world, but it only takes one person. Because the batteries are so heavy. I mean, the magic bullet would be a breakthrough in battery technology, which was lightweight. Maybe with a helium balloon attached to it, so it weighs nothing, right? When you have grandchildren?
Yes, I do. 7 of them. 7.
Do you have conversations with? How old are they? Do you have conversations with them around this stuff?
I have had, yeah.
How do they respond? I mean, you and I have got maybe 30 years more. They've got 70 years more, right?
I think with children today, they believe what you're saying about climate change, but I don't get the picture that they're comprehending the possible seriousness of it all.
Yeah.
And again, that goes back to the fact that we're talking of a few degrees rise in temperature, and the attitude is, well, it does that every day, right? But they forget that it cools off every night, right?
Weather, right?
Yeah, but if we started talking more about heat.
Well, heat is an issue. Here on Vancouver Island, 2 summers ago, we woke up one morning and the sky was yellow from forest fires north of Whistler.
Yes.
And then a month later, there was a forest fire close to where I lived, and neighbors were on 5-minute evacuation. Then, oh, this thing is really come because we're not used to forest fires on Vancouver Island, so it became home, right?
Ask the people of Fort McMurray.
Well, there's a whole town threatened by this. So the danger seems to strike very suddenly in one area, and everyone else watches like it's on television.
Yeah.
But we're going to see more and more of these things.
I think so. I mean, that's the way we're headed.
But hopefully with the new government coming in, we could see a real expansion of electric vehicles, an expansion of super efficient buildings, an expansion of hydrogen technologies, expansion of organic farming.
You're talking of new government here.
A new government in British Columbia.
Yeah, okay.
Our federal government is conflicted.
Hanging on, yeah.
Hanging on, yeah. So what's your fondest memory of, we've got about a minute left, your fondest memory of 50 years in climate science?
Oof, fondest memory.
What comes to mind, just a memory that comes to mind, yes. Any memory.
Okay, I wouldn't say it's fond,
okay.
But just seeing, to me it was, well, let me just go back for a second. I do some church work on relief work.
Yes.
And when I discovered that most of our relief aid, and not just the church, but any relief agency, goes to the subtropics, and I realized that's where the most serious impacts of global warming are as well.
Yeah.
And the two are connected, obviously.
So look, our time is running out, and as well as a climate scientist, you are now a novelist of your book, Convenient Mistruths. Where do people get this, by the way? Amazon? Bookshops?
I keep copies, but Amazon.ca.
Second-hand bookshop in Duncan, Nanaimo?
There is one in Duncan.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to thank you for 50 years of work, and especially 20 years since being in retirement. So look, thank you very much for all of this work. My name is Guy Dauncey. My contribution to changing the world, one of them is my book called Journey to the Future, A Better World is Possible, set in Vancouver in the year 2032, by when it has become one of the world's greenest cities. If you enjoy this kind of conversation and you'd like to come on the show, get in touch with John Mackenzie with the email on the screen. And tune in next week for more scintillating conversation with big, bold ideas, visions, and solutions about our future. Thanks very much.